You're looking good. It feels good to be with you today. Hello, I'm Kendall Bryan Hunter. I'm author of this book, Consider My Servant Job, which is hold up a little better, book about the book of Job in the Old Testament. It's a commentary chapter by chapter. If you're struggling, I'm confident my book will help you find some answers, and if not that, it'll help you find comfort. This is Come Follow Me, Get to the Point. We have 2 podcasts left, and this is the penultimate one. So today's theme is Family Forever, Duties and Joys, and of course this is about the Family Proclamation. So, how to approach that? I think I'll begin with a quote from Sister Sheri L from October 2001. So remember, this is a conference right after 9/11, but they prepare the conference talks months ahead. So Sheri L said this: Satan would have us believe men and women are so alike that our unique gifts are not necessary, or so different we can never hope to understand each other. Neither is true. Thank you, Sister Do. So I'm quoting a single woman when I'm giving this lesson about the Family Proclamation. To begin with, I have charity for all people. I respect people's agencies, or agency, and I hope that's reciprocated, that there's no double standards. From Animal Farm. Some animals, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. So here's some memory. Back in the olden days, back when you had a Saturday session, a conference, or we had the Saturday session, we'd have the women's and priesthood session. I'd sit there and I'd actually listen to the women's session, a little bit of spying on the enemy, reading their battle plans. And I remember hearing President Hinckley talk about that, and I was a bit taken back. I thought, wow, this is kind of impressive. This is something new and different. And then later, my BYU religion professor mentioned it and talked about how the sisters scooped the brethren. Later, we got the copy of the Family Proclamation. They had it printed. This is the nice brown one we have now. We just print them off of the printer, but they had the Daily Universe, the BYU newspaper, printed it out, and I'd keep around with it. I read Joseph F. Smith's book called Gospel Doctrine. It was a compilation of his teachings, and he had a chapter called Marriage, Home, and the Family. And I read it. It's interesting. Everything that was in the Family Proclamation, except the part about the political activism, which I'll talk about, was in there. It was kind of interesting how, in a certain sense, the Family Proclamation is nothing new, but we're living such an insane and madcap world where, as Isaiah prophesied, people call good evil and evil good, that we need something like this to keep our bearings. It's interesting, too, some of the history of how this came about, and this was talked about in conference. I'll put that out of order. So the history was back in 1995, there was a United Nations conference, a women's conference held in Beijing, communist China. And the communist China talked to us about women. That's interesting. If you study Marxism, Karl Marx and later Engels wrote a book about women and it was marriage and the rise of property, private property, I think is what it's called. It's been a while since I've read it, but he wrote a book on it. Engels did, springboarding off of Karl Marx, and he basically took Karl Marx' oppressor-oppressed model and applied that to men and women. John Lennon wrote a song which has a word in it which would get me blocked on social media, that women are the N-word of the world, John Lennon. So it's real. Coverture is real. What coverture is as a legal doctrine is once you're getting married, that men would make all the decisions and women would be subsumed under men. A woman couldn't hold property, and that was an issue with Emma Smith. There's some points about that that are true, but there's also it's a mixed horse pill is what we're swallowing with feminism. They put enough good in there to get you to swallow it, but the poison remains. So Family Proclamation, it's very straightforward. Just read it and compare it to your life. as you're going through and reading the paragraphs and writing, journaling this, thinking about this, pondering it, shutting off the alerts from yourself. This may be a good time just to read the paper ones so you're not distracted by blips and alerts and whatever's from your phone. So just ask yourself, how are things going? Are they good? Are they in process, or does it need improvements? Good in process needs improvement. So think about too is talk about your duties and joys. People are motivated by duty. Philosophers call this deontological. People are motivated by joys. That's the utilitarian. Utilitarian, of course, it means usefulness, but there's also a emotional component. You go back to read Jeremy Bentham's formulation of utilitarianism, and he uses the expression philosophic calculus. Philosophic calculus. It's an unusual word. It's related to the word felicity. It comes from the Latin word felix, which means happiness, and that's the name Felix, the cat, or Felix Leitner. If you watch James Bond movies, the name of Felix, Feliz, depending where you served your mission, felicity. Felix, happiness. It's what maximizes happiness. So, or if you're motivated by happiness or euphoria, look at what you're doing, and if that's getting you to the right place. Resolving concerns. This is get to the point. I can't resolve every concern, but you remember I quoted Sheri L, who herself is famous for not being married, and it's been interesting how just for the past couple of times we've had sort of a standout counts from the General Lee Society president, Chieko Okazaki, Sylvia Allred, but you have Sister Du, Barbara Thompson, Sharon Eubank, now Sister Yi, single sisters in the General Relief Society presidency, but for single men, we just don't have anyone really to look up to. So some issues. I think the biggest issue is, women are getting seduced away from marriage, careerism, commercialism. If you buy into Karl Marx's model that it's an oppressor-oppressed relationship, and it's funny because men can make the same thing now. BYU has talked about other law schools had over 50% or over 50% female admits to law school, and even President Oaks talked about it when he was reminiscing about BYU in the 150th anniversary, which I think is kind of interesting because you arrive at that number by selecting against men in the application process. So just think about that. Then the men who don't get into law school or selected against don't get into law school, what happens to them? Can men say now that things have gotten topsy-turvy, that men are being impressed now? Something to think about this, or we get stuck to this old model. So some issues. The main one has to do with gender as an essential characteristic. One of my favorite books by Truman Madsen is called Eternal Man. Eternal Man is the key text to the Wheatley Institute at BYU. That's what their lectures are called. So he covers a lot of the basic philosophical questions about mind-body problem, self-determination, identity. He ignores two things in the book. I'm not sure he ignores quite the right word, but he doesn't cover them. One is human nature, but the other one about sexual identity. Now, human nature was clearly something on the table at the time. It's just that people believe wrong things about it. People say they believe human nature is good, and that's not what you read in the scriptures. But the other thing, too, is sexual identity. We've actually had a lot of talk about that. Famous article by James E. Talmage called Eternity of Sex. John A. Widsoe talks about it in his book, Rational Theology. So what you're reading in the Family Proclamation, if you do a deep dig into these classics, they talk about how maleness and femaleness, that's something that goes back to the premortal estate. I remember talking with my young men advisors, and he was adamant that no, that's just such a small chance. And I'm not sure what he meant by that. He just didn't believe it. I said, yeah, you had the same sexual identity in the premortal existence. So part of it comes from what your philosophy is about. Is it something akin to the French Revolution, liberty, equality, fraternity? Or can you rephrase that as feelings, freedom, fairness, and friends? So liberty, equality, fraternity. Now let me talk a little bit what I mean by that. That may be confusing to you. First of all, this isn't part of the French Revolution slogan, because the French Revolution slogan, liberty, equality, fraternity, cruelty, and tyranny, is really what it should go. But feelings, are you motivated by emotions? Once again, utilitarianism, philosophic calculus. Feelings aren't facts, they're internal and localized. And the bigger question is, how does reality work? Now, how you feel, that's an important psychological barometer. But if you believe something, does it suddenly become true? If you just believe something, how do you know it's true? Or is that even a relevant question? Sigmund Freud talked about this. He wrote this paper on narcissism, about how some of the narcissistic people have a omniscience of thought and magical thinking, and it's kind of interesting. Some people think, but just because you believe something or want something to be true doesn't necessarily make it true. So back to the French Revolution: liberty, equality, fraternity. So liberty, or you can rephrase that as freedom. That's self-determination, autonomy, basis of secular existentialism. Soren Kierkegaard was a Christian existentialist, who always had the Christian component to self-determination within the Christian context. But how far does autonomy go? Christ said you can't make a hair on your head black or white, or add a cubit to your stature. And are there limits to what you personally choose? And then your sexual identity, is that one of those things that you just outside the reach of personal autonomy, even with our technology right now? I mean, I could go a lot of directions. Let me go this direction. Probably within 50 years, we'll be able to laser print organs. We're working on laser printing organs, growing organs in a lab. So can you take some of your own cells, grow a replacement kidney if you lose one? Yeah, that's coming. That's where the technology is heading, and we have beginnings there. But what about, let's say, a person who's identifies as transgendered? And of course, I respect and love all people. I have a cousin who's transgendered, and he's doing transition surgery right now. So this is coming from this is an issue within my family. But let's say you go to your mother or your sister, get some of their DNA, kind of put in with your DNA, have in a lab grow uterus and breast, and then go through a transition surgery based on that. That's coming, where you can in a lab, getting your mother's or a sister's DNA, so it's really similar to yours, grow it, and then have that gender transformation, gender confirmation surgery, whatever you call it. But are there limits to what you can do? It's interesting. We're approaching a thing where actually almost anything is possible like that. If you can't go through that surgery, certainly in cyberspace, something like, what was it, Ready Player One, some of these cyberplace villages where you just assume a different identity. You have to ask your question, just because you can do something, ought you to do it? President Bill Clinton said, I did it because I could, but should he have done it? So think about that with freedom, or the limits to agency. That's not, we're always concerned about the devil trying to destroy the agency of men, but you're constrained by reality. Another thing, too, is about fairness. Is equality versus equity, that type of question. Distributive justice. Certainly you treat people fairly. You don't want to take people's rights away, property rights, rights to liberty, and allow self-determination. And we respect how the Supreme Court rules on things with gender issues, Obergefell. But is there a cosmic inequality because some people are born men and some people are born as a woman? And does that limit to you? Are we taking, say, well, some people used to say that if you're born black, then you were born a slave and born inferior. If you were born a Christian, does that make you inferior to a Muslim? And is there an inherent unfairness in the universe? We try and correct it, but with self-determination. These are heady questions, and these questions, these very perplexing and thought-provoking questions, are answered in the Family Proclamation. And another thing, too, is liberty, equality, fraternity, or friends. When you socialize, like I said, I have a cousin who's gay and another cousin who's trans female. So, I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area, so I grew up with friends who are probably closeted gays. But you love everyone. You treat people with respect. You have charity for the Jew, Gentile, for the straight, or the homosexual, or whatever your sexual orientation is. Having charity for someone, of course, doesn't mean it's a good choice. And this isn't me imposing my view on you, because reality is a complex system. How does reality function? And does reality function different from how you want it to function? There's an argument, and I see this. You see this a lot. Someone will have a family member who's LGBTQ spectrum, and so they'll go inactive or start attacking the church. And I think that's a bit of an interesting position to take. I was about to say something, probably not a good time to say it right now, this podcast, but if you're making your ethical choices, or even your metaphysical and cosmological and biological choices based upon what a relative does, that's an interesting thing. Okay, so you're saying is, okay, I have a relative who's LGBTQ, so the church, my relative's right, or I'm right and they're wrong. That the church is wrong, but my relative is right. Well, that's an interesting position, because you're setting up your relative as the source of your moral compass. So whatever your relative does or wants or says is the gospel truth, and then the church is wrong. That's an unusual position. Trust not in the arm of flesh. Like I said, this comes back to being charitable to people. You can have a disagreement without compromising the truth. Charity, of course, you love neighbors, but charity rejoiceth in the truth and rejoiceth not in iniquity. That's part of the game plan. So you treat people with respect, and you're doing two things at once. The word is anti, antinomy. It's a bit like where you have a maximum speed, but a minimum speed too. We get this here in Utah, so that cars during winter, cars won't slow people down. People going a little bit too slow. Two horns of a dilemma, antinomy. Here I am, and I'm talking about the family proclamation and eternal families, which are found only in temples. We discussed that in section 132. But Christ said something, Matthew chapter 10. He said, "For I am come to set a man at variance against his father, and the daughter against her mother, and the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a man's foe shall be they of his own household. He that loveth father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And he that loveth son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And he that taketh not his cross and followeth me is not worthy of me." And in our day, that the cross we need to take up is a family proclamation. So carry this on our shoulder. Sometimes we're going to get crucified this. Instead of Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jew, our titulus, the title will read the family proclamation as we're getting crucified. I don't know what the response to this video is be. I'm a very small player. That you really think about this is that you love people, but yeah, this is going to be a dividing line. And I think it's interesting why this one issue is the current dividing line. When you have so many issues out there, marriage, the endowment is updated to use the expression married according to God's law. What's God's law? Well, it's in the family proclamation. So we have issues of cohabitation, same-sex marriage, polyamory, unauthorized polygamy. Now there's authorized polygamy. Russell, Nelson, Dallin H. Oaks, they have second wives. Joseph Fielding Smith had 3. And I can't remember Joseph F. Smith, but yeah, that was before the manifesto. Kind of the issue with marriage is the problem is people have already decided what they want, and they set themselves up as the final arbiter. And that's where the narcissism, pride, and hubris comes in. I have a Bachelor of Arts. When I turned 50, I read an encyclopedia, so you kind of have a limitation of your knowledge. And yeah, there's some things I'm not good at. And when you watch TV, you have these brainiac characters like Velma or Hermione or Mr. Spock or Mr. Data who just know all the answers. We don't. I'm willing to say, look, I'm willing to defer to God on this. That just always defer to the higher tribunal and say, okay, look, there's limits to my knowledge, and the family proclamation be one area. Always testify your beliefs without being snarky and sarcastic, and leave the answer in the lap of the Lord and always express love, and pray to have charity and repent of any hard feelings you had about people who've attacked you for being true and faithful to the family proclamation. It's interesting too. I believe there's a danger of equating yourselves with your inclinations and your appetites. Alcoholics admit that they have a problem, and does this transfer over into other areas? I'm not going to give you the answer. That's something that you can work through. I'm somewhat a bit of a gadfly where I raise questions here. So we're at 20 minutes. Read it, believe it. Read it in conjunction with your patriarchal blessing. Have you tried that? Read the family proclamation. You have the other proclamations, the restoration, of course, the living Christ. But just always be big enough to admit that, hey, look, I may be wrong on this. So let me close with what Sheri L said, her quote again. Satan would have us believe men and women are so alike that our unique gifts are not necessary, are so different we can never hope to understand each other. Neither is true. So let's get to the Christ quotient. As I said earlier, Joseph F. Smith's book, Gospel Doctrine, just covered everything that was in the family proclamation, except for the last paragraph. It says, we call upon responsible citizens and officers of government everywhere to promote those measures designed to maintain and strengthen the family as a fundamental unit of society. Now that's interesting. That's called a political activism. And you talk to a good lawyer if you have questions about church and state. But there's plenty of secular arguments for marriage. Peter Kraft wrote this book called How to Destroy Western Civilization and Other Ideas from the Cultural Abyss. He said the first thing to do to destroy Western civilization is to stop having people marry and have children. That'd kill off the planet in one generation. Expecting all these robots to take care of us. Another thing from one of his books too, he wrote, I can't remember, it's like 3 essays on abortion where he talks about this. Now, Peter Kraft, he's a Roman Catholic philosopher at Boston College. Give him a read. I came to him, he read this book called C.S. Lewis for the Third Millennium. That's the first book of his I read, and I was instantly hooked. But one of the arguments he uses as a philosopher is the apple argument. So when people says, we don't know what a woman is, as a Supreme Court justice once said during her testimony, she didn't know what a woman was. Well, do you know what an apple is? So if you get the person to concede, yeah, they know what an apple is, they say, okay, you can know there's not universal uncertainty about things. You can know some things are true for certain. You know what an apple is. You're not going to confuse it. You can filter out borderline cases. You can know that a Granny Smith, a Macintosh, a Fuji apple, you can separate these things up. You know what an apple is, and so you don't overcomplicate the issue with a lot of tactical agnosticism. Well, if you know what an apple is, you know what a man is, you know what a woman is. You raise the question, do you believe that there's something wrong with you because you're born a man? Do you believe there's something wrong with you because you're born a woman? And this isn't that God doesn't make mistakes, but is there really something wrong with you that you're born a man, that you need to be a woman, or you're a woman, you need to be a man? It's interesting because there are actually secular arguments to the ideas in the family proclamation. Charlie Kirk, the late Charlie Kirk, had this post on Facebook, and I have the link here to it, where his estate posted it, one of his debates, where he says, my beliefs are based on the Bible, but there's rational reasons behind them all. In fact, Dennis Prager wrote a book called The Rational Bible. In our history, we have books by Parley P. Pratt, Key to the Science of Theology, John A. Widsoe, A Rational Theology. Also, I think it was Johnny Widsoe wrote a book called Joseph Smith, a Scientist. Those are scientific things. Here, let me grab this book. Now, just as a disclaimer, I published with Cedar Fort this book by John Lamb, who's a BYU chemistry professor in the Irving Science Center. Wrote this book called Joseph Smith, kind of fancy writing, Joseph Smith's 21st Century View of the World. Truth You Knew Before the World Accepted Them by John David Lamb, published by Cedar Fort. Yeah, there's scientific support for this. For example, I always think it's funny when people leave the church and things that go are the temple garment and then the word of wisdom. The word of wisdom is the most scientifically verifiable aspect of the gospel. So, for example, here's some arguments about marriage and family. Deontological. You have a duty to be married and to have a family. Categorical imperative with marriage and families. If everyone got married, what would happen? If everyone stopped getting married and stopped having families, what would happen? Well, we'd die out in a generation. Utilitarian. Marriage and families maximize happiness. So, of course, there's bad examples. Today in my sacrament meeting, I had a friend of mine, and she talked about getting divorced after 7 years and being in the courthouse, filing the papers, and running to a friend of hers who was also going filing divorce papers at the courthouse. That's a real thing, but general, as a generalization, which of course does not mean every instance. Are you going to be happier being married? That's news we already knew about. Not surprising news. Not surprising news. Hey, we did a study and you're happier being married. That's not surprising. Here's another utilitarian argument. If you aren't born, can you be happy? The devil's punishment was not to have a body. If you weren't born, can you be happy? You can argue from tradition, experience, biology. The good state. Is a good state just a singles bar, Lonely Hearts Club? Abortion. Categorical imperative. What would happen if all women consistently aborted their children? Categorical imperative. Deontological. Utilitarian argument. Does it maximize felicity for a woman to abort her children? Is aborting her children the key to happiness? Here's a legal question. If humans come from fetuses, why don't fetuses have human rights? The question is when does life begin? Because it's eternal. It begins in premortality. But the question is, where do people come from? If people come from fetuses, so at a certain point they don't have human rights. At what age they stop having human rights? Well, when they're born. Well, what about a premature birth? Well, that's born. Okay, you're just kind of arguing definitionally. So, of course, there's a bit of a downside trusting in having the family proclamation. We read it and we testify it, but using these arguments. But that's trusting in the arm of flesh, relying upon the carnal mind. But Christ says in Isaiah, Come now, let us reason together. Section 71. Wherefore, let them bring forth their strong reasons against the Lord. Verily, thus saith the Lord unto you, there's no weapon that is formed against you shall prosper. You may get some blows in, but ultimately we'll win the situation. So here we're at half an hour. This is a very different one. I'm not sure where this is going to go. I'm working off of notes, but and ad-libbing as we normally do. Here we're at the Christ quotient. The penultimate verse it says, we warn that individuals who violate covenants of chastity, who abuse spouse or offspring, not just men abusing women can abuse men. Yes, so if you're a man who's been abused, you probably had an aha moment. It's like, yeah, men can get abused by women. It's mostly psychological and emotional, but the abuse is abuse. Who abuse spouse or offspring who fail to fulfill family responsibilities will one day stand accountable before God. Further, we warn that the disintegration of the family will bring upon individuals, communities, and nations the calamities foretold by ancient and modern prophets. This is an apocalyptic document. Second coming. That's the second coming quotient. Yeah, we don't follow this, and you're seeing it right now. You're seeing what's going on right now. It has to do with the family proclamation, the breakup of families. The atonement quotient. To get the full blessings of the atonement, you need to be married. Families are the best place for teaching about the atonement. This home-centered church thing, one less session of conference means more time of teaching your children at home. Are you strengthening your marriage, preparing for the second coming? Another question. Well, what about singles? The answer is Joseph Smith said God made ample provision. Ample provision. Look that up in your Gospel Library app. That God's made ample provision, and there's a plan and a place for it. So let me conclude with this. Christ loves families. He is part of one, and we are part of his family. Christ is the Father of our salvation. Christ. And that's the point.